What if the greatest guitarist of his era learned to play in a hospital room, not chasing fame, but just trying to hold his mind together? Frank Marino picked up a guitar to survive. Then he stood before 350,000 people at California Jam 2 and outplayed Aerosmith, Ted Nugent, and everyone else on that stage. He was 23. The world should have been his. So, why did they disappear? Because the machine that builds legends destroyed this one. This is the story of Mahogany Rush. March 18th, 1978, Ontario Motor Speedway, California. The sky was enormous. The crowd stretched past any reasonable horizon, and somewhere between 250,000 and 350,000 people had gathered for California Jam 2, one of the largest single-day concert events in rock history. The bill that afternoon read like a coronation of the era. Aerosmith, Heart, Ted Nugent, Santana. These were the titans, the arena kings. And then there was Frank Marino. He was 23 years old. He came from Montreal, and when he walked onto that stage and began to play, he didn't just hold his own against the biggest names in rock. He set the day on fire. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. His performance of Johnny B. Good alone became legend, a blistering extended take on a rock standard, rebuilt from the ground up through sheer virtuoso force. The crowd that had come for the biggest names in rock found themselves talking about the kid who had played earlier in the day. Guitar players in the audience felt something that happens only when you witness a level of talent that makes you reassess everything you thought you understood. At that moment, everything pointed toward the inevitable. Frank Marino was the next guitar hero. Mahogany Rush was about to become one of the biggest rock bands in the world. So why didn't it happen? Because the story of Mahogany Rush isn't about a band that failed. It's about a band that came terrifyingly close, stalled by record label frustrations, shifting musical tides, and a frontman who refused to trade his artistic soul for a marketing machine. And for anyone who heard them on FM radio in the mid-70s, that story has never quite stopped hurting. To understand Mahogany Rush, you had to understand where Frank Marino came from, and how unlikely his entire existence as a musician truly was. Francesco Antonio Marino was born in 1954 in Montreal, son of an Italian and Arab family, raised in a working-class neighborhood of a city crackling with psychedelic energy and social upheaval. He left school in the 7th grade. He was barely a teenager when he fell into the counterculture, the music, the philosophy, and ultimately, the chemistry. In the summer of 1969, Marino went through a serious LSD breakdown. In his own telling, he had been using heavily, and one of those experiences sent him into crisis. He ended up in the Montreal Children's Hospital, fighting his way back from something that could easily have destroyed him. It was there that he found a guitar. He later described picking it up not out of ambition, but simply as a way to stay tethered to reality. The instrument was a rope he grabbed on the way down. The music was the thing that kept his mind from drifting back into the hallucinations that had nearly consumed him. By 1970, Marino had emerged from that crisis and formed the first incarnation of Mahogany Rush, a power trio with bass player Paul Harwood and drummer Jimmy Ayoub. They played free concerts in Montreal parks and high schools, raw, loud, and built on a foundation of Jimi Hendrix, the blues, and the kind of psychedelic hard rock that was still electrifying audiences in the early part of that decade. Almost immediately, the Hendrix comparisons began. A rumor circulated that Marino had been visited by the spirit of Jimi Hendrix during his LSD hospitalization, a myth that took on a life of its own, even though the timeline did not fit. Marino later rejected that story, and the legend eventually became part of the strange mythology surrounding him. But the record labels recognized a commercial narrative when they saw one. The Hendrix comparison got traction, and that traction became a double-edged sword that would follow Marino for the rest of his career. It gave him an audience, but it also gave him a cage. Critics now had a ready-made framework to dismiss him, and they used it. Their debut album, Maxoom, arrived in 1972 and caught the attention of FM radio programmers hungry for raw, psychedelic hard rock. What critics dismissed as imitation, the fans heard as revelation. By the mid-1970s, Mahogany Rush had outgrown Montreal. Their second album, Child of the Novelty in 1974, and the follow-up, Strange Universe in 1975, found an audience on North American FM radio. Tracks like A New Rock and Roll and Strange Universe became favorites for rock listeners who craved something more expansive, more technical, and more dangerous than what filled the commercial dial. But the albums were only part of the story. The real engine of Mahogany Rush's rise was the road.
He was mean, he was a killing machine.
They toured with a relentlessness that bordered on obsession. Night after night, city after city, they built a following, one converted fan at a time. Detroit embraced them early and ferociously. The audiences at the Easttown Theater in 1973 responded to Marino's raw intensity the same way they responded to the factories and the Friday night bars, with recognition. This was music that made sense to people who worked hard and expected their rock and roll to work just as hard. Legendary encounters multiplied. In the early years, Marino shared bills with major hard rock acts and held his own in front of audiences that were not always easy to win over. Word spread. The whispers that had started in Montreal began carrying across the border. In 1975, the band opened for Queen on tour, helping introduce Marino to larger rock audiences in the United States. These weren't bar crowds. These were audiences prepared to judge, and they left converted. By 1976, Marino had signed with a record label, and the arc of the band felt genuinely inevitable. They were sharing circuits with Aerosmith, Styx, and Black Oak, Arkansas. Marino had also become known for his dramatic stage presence, including large-scale theatrical performances that matched the size of the rooms he was playing. He was not interested in standing still. Everything about the timing suggested Mahogany Rush should have exploded. If there was a single year that captured the exact moment when Marino stood on the threshold of rock immortality, it was 1978. The live album, recorded during the 1977 World Anthem Tour, at venues such as the Warehouse in New Orleans and the Hollywood Sportatorium in Florida, arrived as a document of a band at the absolute height of its power. Critics in the guitar press treated it as something close to a sacred text. Fans who had followed the band for years finally had proof they could hand to the unconverted. This wasn't hype, this was evidence. Marino on that record played with a combination that very few musicians in any era have sustained simultaneously: speed, blues, depth, and improvisational fearlessness. Guitar magazines noticed. Serious players noticed. The underground consensus was forming into something that felt like inevitability. But here is where the story develops its central, aching tension. In 1978, Rush was exploding into the mainstream with a farewell to Kings. Ted Nugent was a platinum-selling arena headliner. Van Halen had just released their debut album and were reshaping the conversation around rock guitar entirely. The industry was openly hunting for the next guitar hero, and Mahogany Rush, who had the credentials, the live reputation, and the proven stadium moment at California Jam 2, somehow missed the open door. Part of it was cultural timing. The era of the long blues rock jam was beginning to face new competition from punk and the earliest waves of new wave. The industry was moving toward image, concision, and a different kind of rock stardom than Marino wanted to offer. Marino was none of those things. And that refusal was about to cost him everything that 1978 had seemed to promise. The relationship between Frank Marino and the record label was, from the beginning, a collision course between two fundamentally incompatible visions of what a rock band should be. Executives saw the name Mahogany Rush as a commercial liability. They pressured Marino to rebrand himself as a solo act, to drop the band name and present himself simply as Frank Marino, the guitar hero, the individual product that could be managed and sold. Marino resisted for years, eventually settling on the uncomfortable compromise of Frank Marino and Mahogany Rush, a name that satisfied no one and confused the market in the process. The friction over identity was one thing. The friction over creative control was worse. When the label prepared to release The Power of Rock and Roll in 1981, they presented artwork Marino disliked and had not asked him to approve. Marino had long cared deeply about how his records were packaged, and this was another sign that the machine had little interest in the person behind the music. Something as simple as an album cover became a symbol of how little control he had left. At the exact moment the industry wanted concise radio hits, visual personalities, and MTV-ready acts, Marino remained jam-oriented, psychedelic, and uncompromising in a way the new decade had no framework to accommodate. The Hendrix comparisons that had once provided intrigue now worked against him differently. Critics who had dismissed the comparison as imitation used it as a ceiling, a way of saying that Marino was a brilliant interpreter of someone else's vision, rather than an originator of his own. It was unfair, but it stuck. And in an industry that moved by narrative shorthand, being trapped in someone else's story was a form of commercial death. The very thing that had made Frank Marino special, his refusal to compromise, his rejection of the celebrity machinery, his insistence on music over marketing, had become the trap he could not escape. The 1980s arrived, and the world they brought with them had no room for what Mahogany Rush had always been. While Aerosmith was discovering a second life through high-concept music videos and MTV exposure, while Van Halen was redefining the visual language of rock stardom, Marino found himself increasingly isolated. The albums What's Next in 1980 and The Power of Rock and Roll in 1981 saw the band's chart position stall and then decline. Constant touring that had once been their greatest strength became exhausting and less profitable in a market that had pivoted hard toward the visual and the slick. The label and the band parted ways in the early 1980s. Jimmy Ayub eventually moved on, and Marino released a solo album called Juggernaut in 1983, a record that showcased his versatility but failed to break the commercial stalemate. By the early 1980s, Mahogany Rush had effectively entered a dormant phase. The mainstream, as far as the industry was concerned, had moved on. The collapse was not dramatic. There was no single blow, no spectacular public fracture. It was quieter and sadder than that. A slow realization, accumulating across months and years, that the world Marino had been playing toward had simply ceased to exist. The breakthrough that had seemed so inevitable in 1978, that had felt so close you could almost hear it arriving, had never come. And now, it was clear it never would. He later reflected on being treated by the industry like a movable asset, pushed around, repositioned, and marketed as needed, as though the music itself was incidental to the commercial transaction. For a man who had picked up a guitar in a hospital room as an act of survival, that reduction was more than a business disappointment. It was a betrayal. In the years that followed, Frank Marino did not disappear. He simply moved to a different stage, a smaller one, lit differently, attended by people who knew exactly what they were there for. He continued to record and tour intermittently through the 1980s and 1990s. His 1986 album Full Circle arrived with little label support and was embraced fiercely by the cult following that had never left. The internet era brought a new wave of discovery, younger musicians finding their way back to the 1970s recordings, watching California jam footage, and responding with the same stunned recognition the original audiences had felt. His 2004 live release, Real Live, served as an emphatic reminder that his power as a performer had not diminished. The fans who filled those venues were not there out of nostalgia alone. They were there because the music still worked, still demanded something of you, still left you changed. But the emotional residue of this period carried a bittersweet weight. While peers like Aerosmith and Heart were being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Marino worked in near isolation, sometimes long hours in his studio, a meticulousness that reflected how seriously he took his craft. The peers who understood what he had done spoke loudly on his behalf. Zakk Wylde called him a god within the guitar community. Joe Bonamassa cited him as one of the players who had shaped his own playing. Steve Vai acknowledged the technical influence. Uli Jon Roth invited him on tour as a peer, not a support act. Among musicians, the verdict had never really been in doubt. Among the culture at large, Mahogany Rush remained the band that musicians talked about. The best-kept secret of the classic rock era, the name that came up whenever serious players gathered to discuss who was truly great. Decades removed from the peak of their commercial push, the legacy of Frank Marino and Mahogany Rush had come into sharper, more honest focus. The modern assessment was built not on chart positions, but on testimony. One person described Marino's blues playing as a Formula One race car, a combination of feel, taste, musicality, and technique that existed in its own category. Joe Bonamassa, Steve Vai, and Marty Friedman have each spoken publicly about the influence Marino had on players who came after him. The internet did what the industry had failed to do. It gave people access to the evidence. California jam footage circulated and recirculated, introducing new listeners to what Marino had actually delivered that afternoon at Ontario Motor Speedway. Tracks like Electric Reflections of War found new audiences who responded to Marino's improvisational style with the immediacy of discovery rather than the sentimentality of nostalgia. The consensus that emerged was clear. Mahogany Rush had not disappeared because they lacked talent. They disappeared because the industry changed, the trends shifted, and Frank Marino refused to adapt in a way that would have required him to become someone else entirely. In another era, one with more patience for the virtuoso, more room for the jam, more tolerance for the uncompromising, Mahogany Rush might have become one of the biggest rock bands in the world, and for the fans who pressed their ears to a car radio on a Friday night in 1975 and heard Strange Universe for the first time, that thought remained the most haunting one of all. The story of Mahogany Rush returned, in the end, to the same paradox it began with. Frank Marino had everything the industry supposedly required for superstardom: the near-mythological origin story, born from crisis and survival, the undeniable virtuosity that left his peers speechless, the stadium-level live show proven before 350,000 witnesses, and a fan base that remained loyal across decades. He had the guitarist, he had the live show, he had the timing, and he had the audience. In 2021, Marino retired from touring, driven by health issues. But the music remained. That one final chapter, in one form or another, still felt unfinished. Whether he returned to a stage or not, what he built remained. The music survived the machine that had failed to accommodate it. The talent outlasted the trends that had rendered it temporarily inconvenient. The fans who stood in that crowd at California Jam and watched a 23-year-old from Montreal redefine what a guitar could do. They never needed a Hall of Fame to confirm what they had witnessed. Sometimes, in rock history, being great isn't enough, and sometimes, it turns out to be the only thing that lasts. Mahogany Rush proved that talent alone doesn't guarantee the throne. Frank Marino played with a fire that left audiences speechless and peers humbled, but the machine he refused to join couldn't carry him where his playing deserved to go. The story is bittersweet, the kind that lingers. Because the music was real, the talent was undeniable, and the fans never forgot. What's your Mahogany Rush memory? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of rock's forgotten past.